Good morning, Europe, and dobro ranku. I'm Roger Hilton, and welcome to this morning edition of Global Tremors. Nearly 3 weeks into Russia's assault on Ukraine, both the media and information landscape remain a critical battleground for Kyiv and Moscow to wage battle. From its disinformation efforts, live with me today is Vitalii Rybak from Internews Ukraine, who will speak on Marina Ovsyannikova and its ramifications, Russia's evolving disinformation tactics, and the specific targeting of President Zelensky. Vitalii, welcome to Global Tremors.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
So, Vitalii, as we normally do here on Global Tremors this morning, we're going to start with a couple of news items before getting into our questions. So, according to figures produced by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Russia has suffered in excess of 13,500 casualties. Next week, NATO will be holding an extraordinary meeting of leaders in Brussels. It was widely reported yesterday that the prime ministers of Slovenia, Poland, and Czechia visited Ukraine by train. And finally, in the finance world, Russia is due to make 2 interest payments today on its dollar bonds, but it is still unclear whether Western investors will actually receive their payment, potentially lining up a uniquely messy government debt default. For everybody out there, Russia's foreign bonds are trading at about 20% of their face value, which suggests very little confidence of being repaid. So, Vitalii, before we came on air, we spoke a little bit about Marina and sort of all of the questions. So let me start with you. A lot of positive coverage was given to Marina Ovsyannikova for interrupting her network's own broadcast with this anti-war messaging. What is your impression of this positive coverage she's received in the West? And should the Western audience be careful in praising her given her previous work at TV?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. And while I get to my long answer, please keep in mind, I'm a side of conflict here, so I'm Ukrainian. Russia invaded my country. I have also been studying Russian propaganda for years now, since 2014, and I'm generally very skeptical towards what appears on Russian TV, and I'm also, not impartial towards Russian right now. So taking all that into consideration, so I think what Marina Ovsyannikova did was brave if it was real. I can't confirm or deny that this was real because so it's 50-50 in my opinion. It might have been real. So really she said she was ashamed of what she's been doing and what Russian propaganda has been doing. That's why she decided to protest on air. However, also keep in mind that it took her 19 days to do that. And we see that the fine was not very big. So she did not receive any jail sentence. She only received a fine of 30,000 Russian rubles, which is a little bit less than $300 right now. So not a very big fine, I would say. Taking into consideration that Russian propaganda can act, it can be very tricky to detect, and it can be very subversive. So I would also not rule out that this whole story was planned ahead. Maybe not by the Kremlin, but maybe Konstantin Ernst, the head of Первый канал, this channel where the whole story took place. But, basically, this plays in Ukraine's favor because any piece of information which goes out to ordinary Russians about war taking place in Ukraine helps, definitely because Russian propaganda has been brainwashing its own population for years, telling terrible stories about Ukrainians who are Nazis and genociding people in Donbass. So any piece of truth is definitely worth it. However, if we also take a look at the placard Marina was holding, we see that words in English were bigger than words in Russian. So maybe her main intention was not to bring out this message to Russian audiences, but maybe to reach out to international audiences. I'm not stating that it was like this, but just take a look at this placard and you clearly see that words in English are bigger than words in Russian. And we definitely see right now that this story was picked up by many Western media, and also on Twitter, she has been a huge hit. People were welcoming her actions, saying she was brave and so on. So, I definitely understand these sentiments, and also for us Ukrainians, like I said previously, any action which goes against what Kremlin propaganda says is good. We also have to keep in mind that Ovsyannikova used to work for years spreading this very propaganda she now acts against. So, in my opinion, that was the least she could do in this situation. Maybe sanctions are already having an effect and also motivated her to protest somehow. But she's not alone. She's the most famous dissident in media sphere, Russian media sphere right now. But we also hear reports about many people leaving RT, leaving other Russian state-owned TV channels. But while they're doing this now, when the war broke off, we have to keep in mind that they worked for years spreading Russian propaganda, preparing Russian population to accept this invasion, dehumanizing Ukrainians. So they were partly the reason why this war ever started in the first place. It was not only the Kremlin these were not only Russian generals, Russian defense minister Sergei Shoigu who made this possible. Russian propagandists also made this possible. And we see that the US, the EU are also targeting key Russian propagandists like Vladimir Solovyov, Margarita Simonyan, and others with sanctions. And so clearly the West also sees these Russian propagandists as people responsible for this war. So that's also what I see Marina Ovsyannikova and her colleagues, but on somewhat smaller scale.
Sorry, Vitalii, let me just stop you for one moment. I mean, for all of our viewers who might have just joined us, we're talking with Vitalii Rybak, a disinformation expert based in Ukraine, and he's giving us sort of the debrief and unpacking what we might have missed when it comes to sort of the public protests of Marina Ovsyannikova. The 2 points, Vitalii, that really stood out for me was one about sort of, while it might be 50-50 if this was staged or if it was set up, any piece of truth is worth it, which I thought was a very good impression. And also something that I did also notice as a native speaker was that the English language was more prominent than the Russian. So I think that's an interesting view for everybody out there watching. Vitalii, this segues very nicely to my second question is, here we are, she's on, Russian television where 90% of people get their news. Do you think that there's any chance that this active protest will influence or galvanize the general Russian public? Or, I mean, as we had said, do you think that ship has already sailed?
Yeah, well, I definitely hope that this might take some effect, because God knows we in Ukraine need any support we can get, including from Russian population, because if people in Russia were going out to the streets in massive numbers protesting against this war, this would definitely make it more difficult for the Kremlin to legitimize this war, to keep it going, if people were to protest against it. So we already saw some protests in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other big cities in Russia, where thousands of people went out, and dozens of thousands in total, also thousands of people were detained. We clearly welcome these actions, but sadly, these are not enough to change things, because in my opinion, the ship has sailed, and nowadays, as Vladimir Putin has been in power for 22 years, protests on the street hardly can change anything. Well, maybe millions of people went out. Maybe in that case, it could have some effect. But now we see that there are 140 million people in Russia, and only dozens of thousands went out to protest. Clearly, so this is a very small percentage of the total population of Russia. And if we take a look at what Russian society thinks, it is not that clear whether they are for the war or against the war. So let me tell you a few figures from Levada Center, which is an independent pollster operating in Russia. So Levada Center poll in February so it was prior to the war, just a few days prior to the war, it has shown that 71% of respondents approved of what Russia's President Vladimir Putin was doing. 52% of respondents said they were feeling negatively towards Ukraine, and 47% said that the perspective of Russia-Ukraine war did not frighten them, so they were okay with it. And also, when asked about who would be the main reason of potential Russia-Ukraine war at the moment, so 60% said that the West and NATO would be the main reason for this war, not Russia, definitely. So these clearly are the effects of Russian propaganda, which has been acting there for years, brainwashing Russians. And so clearly we can't be 100% sure whether these people are fully informed and still made these decisions, or whether they are only getting information from Russian TV, and so they don't get the full picture. We don't know at the moment, but still this or that way, sadly, very many people either support what Russia has been doing in Ukraine, or they remain neutral, remain silent, which in this case acts as support in Russian aggression. Because if you do nothing to stop this aggression, so basically this way you support it. That's how we in Ukraine see that. Maybe Europeans and people in the United States would see it differently, but that's how we in Ukraine see this.
Yeah, so for everybody joining us right now on Global Tremors, Vitalii Rybak has just sort of updated us on the latest figures coming out of the Levada Center, which is, everybody knows, a very legitimate polling center, the main independent one in Moscow, where 52% of people in Russia have a negative impression towards Ukraine. Vitalii, I want to stay on the issue of propaganda and move specifically to sort of Russia's disinformation tactics. Before I get to the question, I just want all of our viewers just to bring something to their attention. Last year, the GlobeSec Vulnerability Index came out that evaluated the susceptibility to foreign malign influence in 8 Central European and Western Balkan countries. And Vitalii, I don't think it will come as a surprise to you that the findings of the report said that public administrations in these regions are very rigid and that they struggle to communicate to adapt in times of crisis. So obviously, Vitalii, Ukraine has been under a lot of stress. The two questions I have for you is, we're 3 weeks into this invasion, how has Russia's disinformation tactics changed? And then the second one is how is the Ukrainian government communicating morale, sort of communicating resilience and trying to boost morale in these times of crisis?
Yeah, okay, so first, Russian disinformation did not change really a lot during these 3 weeks, because it basically right now, maybe that's inertia or some other reason, but Russian propaganda keeps pushing and spreading the same narratives which were active throughout the last 8 years. So since the annexation of Crimea and Russian invasion of Donbas in 2014. So the main narrative, the most popular one, being that there are Nazis in Ukraine who allegedly control public life, and they control the decisions which are being made by the Ukrainian government. And these alleged Nazis have been fueling war against the people of Donbas and the genocide of people in Donbas. Of course, that is not true, because all nationalistic even parties, there are no Nazi parties like in Ukraine, but maybe nationalistic far-right parties, the biggest one, Svoboda, has like 1.3% support, and other two have even less. So jointly, all far-right parties have around maybe 2% of support in Ukraine, which, as you can clearly see, not a lot, and these parties are not represented in Ukraine's parliament. And also we have to keep in mind that Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, is a Jew, and a lot of prominent Jews in Ukraine spoke against this narrative, and they confirmed that there are no Nazis in Ukraine who affect their lives in any way. But nevertheless, So Russia keeps pushing this narrative, and even now, in media on the non-government controlled territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, in Crimea, Russia keeps telling these stories about Nazis. And if you listen to what Vladimir Putin said prior to the invasion, so he said, and also after the invasion, he said that among goals of this Russian special military operation, as they call it, was denazification of Ukraine, along the demilitarization of Ukraine. So it is very interesting how Russian propaganda seems to have tricked itself here, because from what we also hear now, from what Russian soldiers, captured Russian soldiers have been saying, that many of them were led to believe that the invasion of Ukraine would be very easy and Ukraine's armed forces would not resist, Ukraine's population would not resist, and only these so-called Nazi battalions would resist. So basically, this would not be plentiful and this would be an easy ride for Russians. So they were bringing even uniforms to parade on Hreschatyk in Kyiv to celebrate their victory very, very quickly. And so it's quite interesting to see that maybe Russia disinformated itself here. And so what various experts have been saying, that the chain of command in Russia is very strict, and a lot of people in their reports were not putting what really was taking place in Ukraine, but they were putting information which their superiors wanted to see. So if Kremlin propaganda was saying that there are Nazis in Ukraine who control everything and wage war against people in Donbas, we report that that is indeed the case. And so many decisions clearly were made based on this incomplete information. And we see that people in southern regions of Ukraine, so for instance in Kherson, in smaller cities like Melitopol, Berdyansk, so people, Ukrainians, protest against Russian invaders with Ukrainian flags, but they are speaking in Russian. So they were saying things like "Российский автомат, fascistский оккупант," so Russian gun is a fascist occupant. And well, clearly these people speaking Russian still identified themselves as Ukrainians. So this also pretext to protect Russian-speaking population made no sense, because a lot of people who were speaking Russian in their daily lives, and there were no problems with this, so they did not need any kind of protection.
Vitalii,
yeah.
Sorry about that. Before we move on to it, I think I just want to sum it up for everybody, because there's a lot to unpack there. So as you said, 3 weeks into the war, Vitalii, based on your professional expertise, the tactics remain essentially unchanged by Russia, that they're still pushing this denazification, demilitarization concept. And again, if you're just joining us this morning on Global Tremors, Vitalii Rybak has outlined sort of the quote-unquote the support of far right in Ukraine. The largest party only has 1.3% Svoboda party, and across the entire country, only 2% of the entire population supports this extreme right position. And as you said, Vitalii, you said that the Russians have in itself sort of tricked themselves and believed their own propaganda, which has led to the miscalculation. So, I mean, you know, something that stood out was, just because you're a Russian speaker does not mean that you're pro-Russia, which is something I learned earlier. So against the backdrop of everything you've mentioned and all of this onslaught of disinformation, how is the Ukrainian government communicating to its people, as I said earlier, about resilience building and morale boosting? Because 3 weeks in, it doesn't look as if morale is crumbling at all. And if you see the videos from Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, they more than ever now are determined to hold their city for Ukraine and for Europe.
Yeah, so that's entirely right. And if we take a look at public opinion polls, we see that, well, now 70, these are figures from Rating Poll, which is a very trusted pollster in Ukraine. So 73% of people believe that things in Ukraine are moving in the right direction, and this is the highest figure ever. So it might sound strange, but during the war, there were never this many people in Ukraine believing that the country is moving in the right direction. And also, the very same poll shows that 93% of respondents support what President Zelensky has been doing, and 96% support what Ukraine's armed forces have been doing. So clearly, this fact that Russian blitzkrieg plan was not realized, and Ukraine's armed forces clearly resisting. Ukraine's armed forces have lost way less soldiers than Russians. So if I remember correctly, the last official figure for the losses among Ukrainians were 1,300 soldiers, and so it is a figure from several days ago. So clearly a lot of people are involved, not only those who serve in the armed forces, but this or that way the majority of people are somehow involved in this war efforts. So they donate to the army, they serve as volunteers, and they even those who are abroad, they also try to do what they can, coming out to protest in European capitals, to try to draw public opinion to this issue of war. So in my opinion here, it's more not that the government communicated very good and boosted morale of Ukrainians. I believe that this was more a grassroots initiative, which was later picked up by the government, because make no mistake, government communications are very effective just as well. Speech writers of President Zelensky, in my opinion, are gods. So they're very good, and his speeches are excellent. I believe not a single speech, his speech since the beginning of the war was subpar or like mediocre. All of these have been good. And people from his team, Oleksiy Reznikov, Ukraine's defense minister, his advisors like Oleksiy Arestovich, who often also speak on TV, they do a very good job of delivering information to Ukrainians, calming them down, making them sure that Ukraine will win. And we see that also according to rating poll, 90% of Ukrainians believe that Ukraine will win this war. So the nation is really united like never before. But also, once again, keep in mind that if it were not the general mood of Ukraine's population, there is hardly anything government could have done, because Ukrainians are very not like Russians in this regard. They are very, in some degree, they're anarchic. So they're very grassroots. They value what community is doing, and they value people before the government. And what people around them are doing is more important than what government is doing. And therefore, so this initiative started, I believe, from people. And it was like this in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine in Donbass. Ukraine's army at that point was really bad equipped. So a lot of soldiers had no protection, no helmets, even no food, nothing like that. So in 2014, 2015, basically Ukraine's volunteers equipped the army in this most crucial period. And only after that, government finally contributed to equipping Ukrainian army and turning it into a really powerful army we see it to be right now, because Ukraine's army was thought to be 25th in the world's ranking, and Russian army was positioned second. And we see now that 25th army clearly can't hold off the second army. So this was also a huge achievement of the whole Ukrainian nation, not only the government, but also ordinary people, volunteers who in their free time worked on purchasing equipment for Ukrainian army, delivering it to the front line, Yeah, so that's also what's happening in place right now. It's not only that the government is communicating to people what should be done, it goes both ways. So basically, the government inspires Ukrainians, but also Ukrainians inspired the government, because I strongly believe that President Zelensky, his very powerful stance today, his very powerful speeches, he seems very motivated, but I strongly believe he was motivated by the actions of Ukraine's army and actions of the Ukrainian people.
Vitalii, this entire conflict, it's Adam and Goliath, and this entire conflict has really been about defying expectations. So, I mean, whether it's a ranking of 2 to 25th, the visualization of the land masses, all of Russia versus Ukraine, I mean, it goes without saying that they have performed beyond anybody's expectations, with even in Western leaders with training. As you just said, for everybody just joining us, I love this concept about how sort of it's a down-up approach, how the government itself hasn't been the one promoting the messages, but as you sort of elaborated, Ukrainians they're self-organizing. They care more about community and people than they do about the messaging and the government. And it's really worked hand in hand in the messaging, right? Because the government has picked up on this morale and sort of this overall solidarity and community spirit. Vitalii, it goes, as you said, Zelensky's speechwriters are God, but you need somebody to deliver the message. So the last question here on Global Tremors for you is, a huge part of this disinformation effort by Russia and also in the military realm has been to sort of handicap and also to sort of potentially decapitate President Zelensky. There's been multiple disinformation attempts about how he's fled Kyiv 20 times, that his wife has a villa in France. Can you comment a little bit as we end here about sort of what are the specific tactics that Russia is trying to use to discredit President Zelensky, and overall, how do you think his team has reacted on a stratcom level?
Yeah, so clearly Russia's efforts to undermine President Zelensky also started long before this war ever happened. So for years, Russian propaganda was acting via its proxies in Ukraine. So there were a lot of pro-Russian media and opinion leaders who were harshly criticizing President Zelensky. So the main point of criticism was that he was elected on the platform of making peace with Russia, but he decided to proceed with politics of his predecessor, President Poroshenko, and this was used as a point to develop an argument that allegedly President Zelensky has no agenda, no own agenda, and he is completely controlled by the West. And the whole Ukrainian government is allegedly controlled by the US, NATO, the EU, which are aiming to drain natural resources from Ukraine and control the Ukrainian government in order to do that. So these pro-Russian, or as we also call them, anti-Western actors had years to promote these narratives. Why I say anti-Western? Because Russian propaganda lately has been a little bit more sly and less direct, and acting in Ukraine, it was not glorifying Russia and saying that Russia is good. It was more picking up on the West, as I said, on the US, EU, NATO, saying that basically the West is just as bad as Russia and Ukraine, and it just uses Ukraine to pick on Russia, and Ukraine has no allies it could rely upon. So that was the main criticism of President Zelensky prior to the war. So during the war, we also seen many narratives. So first, there were talks even on the highest level among Russian officials that, well, Ukraine's government is the government of drug addicts and Nazis. It was clearly also a reference to President Zelensky, because there were rumors, like unconfirmed rumors, that President Zelensky is a drug addict. These rumors were also running for years, and Russia has used them now. And they, as you said, they were using the idea that maybe Zelensky has already left Kyiv and he's not here and his family is not here. So what I have to say about this is that we really do not know where his family is right now, because, well, but that's understandable, because being a president of a country, he's target number one. And according to the Ukrainian government, Volodymyr Zelensky has already survived more than 10 assassination attempts. So clearly his family is target number two. And while we do not know where exactly his family is, I think that is entirely understandable. And families of a lot of ordinary Ukrainians left abroad. So even if his family is abroad, I don't think that is a huge problem. The main reason is that he is definitely here, and that can be argued with because he records videos very often outside of the president's office with members of his team, which are seen in Kyiv. And also there were even press conferences including Western journalists in the president's office, and they were there and he was there. So clearly also there is no reason to say that President Zelensky has left Kyiv. This also comes from what I said previously, that while President Zelensky now inspires people, people also inspire him, and you can clearly see how energetic he is, even though he's very tired. Also, understandably, there were 20 days of this war already, and I doubt he gets too much sleep, but still he does everything he can, not only to act as military commander, because he is commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces according to Ukraine's constitution. He also does a lot on for the diplomatic efforts, so in conversations with the European Union, with the United States officials and others. So yeah, I believe that his actions clearly undermine Russian narratives about that he is controlled by the West, because we've seen him criticizing the West and NATO very often and very harshly. And we also see that, well, I believe a drug addict could not do what Zelensky is doing right now. So, but once again, this propaganda is targeted not on Ukrainians anymore and not on the West. I believe that these propaganda narratives are designed for the domestic audience in Russia, because basically now, as we're seeing that Russia switched off, so it blocked Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So I believe that Russia understands that it is losing the information war right now. So very few people in the world believe in Russian version of why this war started. The majority of people, including media, support Ukraine and cover Ukraine's position more and show that indeed a war is taking place. Russians are shelling Ukrainian cities, killing Ukrainian citizens, not the soldiers, but civilians, ordinary people. And very few people in the world believe in what Russia has to say. Therefore, Russia increasingly more orients its propaganda on its internal audience, and because, well, that's maybe the only audience which still believes in what Russian media, Russian state-owned media have to say.
Well, Vitalii, I mean, we're sort of at the end of our rope here on Global Tremors, and just to sum everybody, to provide everybody who's joined us a little bit late, the last summaries from Vitalii Rybak, based in Ukraine, is there are still ongoing efforts by Russian propaganda to discredit President Zelensky, to try to sort of delegitimize his rule, and also that maybe the ongoing propaganda, the only segment that's receptive to this is the internal audience of Russia, which is a great point. The attacks against President Zelensky started way before the war, about him trying to position him as a pro-Western puppet who had no agenda, who had no ideas of his own. And a startling number, Vitalii, thank you for saying that on air, I had never read that he had potentially survived 10 assassinations. So, I mean, it just goes to say that these videos that he does outside, speaking to the hospital, the idea that Russia's trying to sort of say that these videos are pre-recorded is just farcical. So, Vitalii, again, thank you so much for coming on and unpacking so much, sort of the idea about how Ukraine is this movement of solidarity is grassroots. For everybody watching, we are going to be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. talking to Victoria Vodichenko. So, Vitalii, before we sign off, do you have any last words or closing remarks for us this morning on Global Tremors?
Yeah, so maybe I would like to thank all people who are watching us and all the societies of the EU countries, of the US. Thank you very much for your support with humanitarian assistance, military assistance, so assisting Ukraine with weapons, and even your thoughts and prayers. Everything is very valuable to us nowadays, and we in Ukraine clearly see that the world supports us, and this gives us gives us energy and motivation to go further and defend Ukraine. Yeah, so also keep in mind that Russian propagandists have already been saying that they would not stop on Ukraine. So while this war is taking place in Ukraine right now, nobody in Europe is safe, and Central European states, Baltic states, maybe next, if Russia is not stopped right here, right now. So I urge everyone who's watching to do what they can to stop Russia right now, because Russian imperialism won't stop in Ukraine, sadly.
Well, Vitalii, those are some heavy words to end off on. But like you said, I mean, Slava Ukraina, we stand with you 100%. We're not there yet. And again, thank you so much for coming on. And to everybody watching, we'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. CET.